I'm Dr. Richard Duplantis, and you're watching It's Your Health. Our topic for today is on inflammation. Inflammation is an immune response of the body tissue to injury or infection. It is an important component of the innate immunity. The inflammatory process involves a complex biological cascade of molecular and cellular signals that alter physiological responses, ultimately resulting in familiar clinical symptoms of pain, swelling, heat, and redness. At the site of the injury, cells release molecular signals that cause a number of changes in the infected area. There's a vasodilation, which is increased blood flow, increased vascular permeability, exudation of fluids containing proteins like antibodies, an invasion of several different types of leukocytes, including granulocytes, monocytes, and lymphocytes, which make up the white blood cells. Neutrophils are the first leukocytes to appear at the injured site. These cells phagocytize or engulf and kill invading microorganisms through the release of nonspecific toxins, such as the superoxide radicals, hypochlorite, and hydroxyl radicals. These reactive oxygen species kill pathogens as well as adjacent cells, and the sick and healthy alike. These white blood cells we call neutrophils also provide additional killing activities by releasing antimicrobial peptides and proteins such as defensins. These are on-binding proteins into the phagosome. These white blood cells we call neutrophils also release cytokines, including interleukin-1 and interleukin-6, and also tumor necrosis factor alpha and gamma interferon. These are pro-inflammatory cytokines, and in turn induce the liver to synthesize various acute phase reactive proteins. These also induce a systemic inflammatory response. You get fever, you get leukocytosis, which is a rushing of white blood cells to the area. You get a rise in a number of these white blood cells in this specific area of inflammation. Acute inflammation is a normal process that protects and heals the body following physical injury or infection. However, if the agent causing the inflammation persists for a prolonged period of time, the inflammation becomes chronic. Chronic inflammation can result from a viral or microbial infection. You can have an environmental antigen such as pollen. You can also have autoimmune reactions or persistent activation of the inflammatory molecules. Chronic inflammation is primarily mediated by monocytes and long-lived macrophages. Monocytes mature into macrophages once they leave the bloodstream and inner tissues. The macrophages will engulf or eat and digest these microorganisms and these senescent cells. They release several different chemical mediators, including the interleukin-1, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and prostaglandins that permeate the pro-inflammatory response. At later stages, other cells, including the lymphocytes, invade the affected tissues. The T lymphocytes kill virus-infected cells, and the B lymphocytes produce antibodies that specifically target the invading microorganisms for destruction. Macrophages and other leukocytes release ROS, these reactive oxidase, peroxidase, that destroy the sources of inflammation. The protease is produced. However, damage to the body's own tissue often result in a chronic inflammation. In chronic inflammation, damaged tissue are repaired through replacement with cells of the same type or with fibrous connective tissue. Another important point characteristics of chronic inflammation is local angiogenesis. This is the development of new blood vessels. In some instances, the body is unable to repair tissue damage, and the inflammatory cascade continues. Chronic inflammation is abnormal and does not benefit the body. In fact, chronic inflammation is involved in a number of disease states. Several human diseases are inflammatory in nature, including asthma, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, polymyalgia rheumatica, tendonitis, bursitis, laryngitis, gingivitis, gastritis, celiac disease, diverticulitis, and inflammatory bowel disease. Additionally, a number of chronic diseases have inflammatory components such as atherosclerosis, obesity, diabetes mellitus, cancer, and perhaps even Alzheimer's disease. The biochemical mechanism underlying several of these diseases is unknown, and the role of inflammation in disease pathogens is still under investigation. Looking at the nutritional aspect, one's diet can affect an inflammatory response within the body. The roles of various dietary components in inflammation are discussed at length. Clinical biomarkers of inflammation are used to study the effect of dietary constituents on inflammation. C-reactive protein, which is an acute phase reactant protein, is a common clinical biomarker for cardiac-related inflammation and also a general marker for inflammation. Oftentimes, C-reactive protein is measured. Other common clinical indicators of inflammation are high erythrocyte sedimentation rate, or we call the SED rate, a high white blood count, and also a low albumin level. However, these tests are nonspecific, meaning an abnormal result might result from conditions unrelated to inflammation. Various cytokines and adhesion molecules are not commonly used clinically because they do not identify the source of inflammation. Rather, they are frequently used in scientific research. Some biomarkers of inflammation are as follows. Biomarkers of inflammation, the acute phase reactant proteins, we call C-reactive protein, CRP, the serum amyloid A, and the von Willebrand factor, white cell count, erythrocyte sedimentation rate, cytokines, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha. The adhesion molecules, abbreviation for CRP is for C-reactive protein. ESR is an abbreviation for erythrocyte sedimentation rate. And ICAM1 is intracellular adhesion molecules 1 and interleukin. We talk about the von Willebrand factor. What is von Willebrand factor? It's a very important protein. Von Willebrand factor acts like glue to help the platelets stick together and form a blood clot. Without this, we would bleed to death. Von Willebrand factor also carries clotting factors 8. Another important protein that helps your blood clot, factor 8 is the protein that is missing or doesn't work well in people who have hemophilia, which is a genetic bleeding disorder. In addition to specific dietary factors, achieving and or maintaining a healthy body weight is critically in prevention of chronic inflammation or inflammatory diseases. For instance, elevated CRP, C-reactive protein levels, have been linked to obesity, and weight loss has been shown to decrease this C-reactive protein level. Obesity and abdominal obesity especially, also called visceral obesity or centralized obesity, are risk factors for several diseases associated with inflammation, such as cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and this metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is in a men waist of greater than 42 inches, and hypertension and high cholesterol is the metabolic syndrome. The cause of these diseases are not completely established, and the role of inflammation in disease pathogenesis is under investigation. For example, it is known that adipose tissue secretes several inflammatory factors known as the adipokines or just adipokines. And obesity is associated with macrophage infiltration in adipose tissue. Of the exact role of inflammation in the pathogenesis of obesity is unknown at this time. Dietary fats and cholesterol in general, the epidemiological studies have found that diets high in saturated fat and in trans fat are pro-inflammatory in nature. In contrast, some studies have found that adherence to a Mediterranean-style diet, which is a diet high in monounsaturated fats, may help to reduce inflammation in the body. A Mediterranean diet emphasizes olive oil, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, fish, whole grains, and moderate consumption of alcohol. Several of these foods are important sources of the essential fatty acids that are involved in the inflammatory process. A higher intake of the omega-3 fatty acids, like the alpha-linoleic acid and the eicosapentaenoic acid, EPA, have been generally associated with decreased biomarkers of inflammation. Rich dietary sources of alpha-lipoic acid include flaxseed, hair oil, and walnuts contain it, and canola oil. EPA and DHA are found in oily fish, such sources such as salmon, your deep water fish. And it's the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids in the typical Western diet is about 15 to 20 to 1, yet it's estimated that humans evolved on a diet with an omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratio about 1 to 1. Decreasing this ratio will likely reduce the prevalence and severity of various inflammatory conditions observed in Western societies. As such, essential fatty acids in their research newsletter article here, such as What's Good About Dietary Fat, is a good article about this. Low cholesterol diets may also reduce inflammation in the body. One study found a high cholesterol diet of 4 eggs per day for 4 weeks increased levels of C-reactive protein and serum amyloid A. Two inflammatory markers are in lean BMI under 27.5, subjects who were insulin sensitive, but not in lean subjects who were insulin resistant or obese, had a BMI greater than 27.5. Individuals in these two latter groups had elevated baseline levels of C-reactive protein and serum amyloid A. An 8-week intervention study patients with the primary hypercholesterolemia found that a diet low in both cholesterol, under 200 milligrams per day, and saturated fats was linked to a reduced inflammation, was evidenced by a 39% reduction in C-reactive protein, in cardiovascular disease, the vascular walls. This is a pro-inflammatory disease. We mentioned a little bit early on that atherosclerosis, to be involved, it's one of the diseases of the inflammation process. And, there was an article I read, this was called The Heart on Fire. And this pro-inflammatory condition of the heart causing a great deal of problems and also the progression of atherosclerosis. Dietary carbohydrates, such as hyperglycemia, can cause inflammation through varying mechanisms that result in the production of free radicals and pro-inflammatory cytokines. Thus, high glycemic index and glycemic load diets may stimulate inflammation. Glycemic index is the blood glucose rising potential of the carbohydrates in different foods. We talk about the glycemic index. Some foods having a higher glycemic index, which there's a rapid rise in the glucose level, and other foods that don't allow the glucose levels to rise as rapidly in the low glycemic foods. A more accurate indication of this regular glycemic response to dietary carbohydrates is the glycemic load. Glycemic load incorporates the relative quality of carbohydrates characterized by this glycemic index, which I mentioned here. The consumption of a high glycemic index foods will result in a higher, more rapid increase in blood glucose levels than consumption of low glycemic index foods. This rapid increase in blood glucose are potent signals for the beta cell of the pancreas to increase the insulin secretion, which can cause a sharp decrease in glucose levels and lead to hypoglycemia. So the overconsumption of these high glycemic index foods, will produce this rapid glucose load, and you get a rebound phenomenon where you have this tremendous amount of insulin being produced, stimulated by the rapid rise in glucose, where it overcompensates and produces a condition we call hypoglycemia. In contrast, this consumption of low glycemic index foods results in lower but more sustained increases in blood glucose and lower insulin demands on the pancreatic beta cells. There was a study of 39 overweight, obese adults found adherence to a low glycemic index. Energy-restricted diets resulted in a 48% decrease in the C-reactive protein level. Inflammation, but also a general marker of inflammation. Individuals in this study who followed a low-fat, energy-restricted diet experienced only a 5% decline in C-reactive protein despite similar weight loss and body composition changes. There's another small study that shows that acute hyperglycemia resulted in increased levels of various pro-inflammatory cytokines. This effect was more pronounced in individuals with impaired glucose tolerance compared to the healthy controls in the study. More information on the role of dietary carbohydrates in the prevention of chronic disease such as cardiovascular disease and diabetes, should be further studied. In addition, you have higher intakes of dietary fiber may protect us against the development of diseases with inflammatory components. This includes cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Dietary proteins and amino acids are important too as well because there are a number of studies that evaluated the potential of soy protein in the prevention of these diseases with its inflammatory component. Some clinical trials have specifically evaluated the effects of soy protein or soy food consumption on the C-reactive protein level, which is the inflammation level, and other inflammatory biomarkers. The higher the C-reactive protein, the higher the inflammatory reaction or inflammation that exists in the body. We have several studies that have been done in this area. The analysis of the data collected from the third National Health Nutrition Examination Survey, it indicated a higher intakes of the amino acid arginine were associated with a lower level of C-reactive protein. Common sources of arginine in the American diet include meat, poultry, fish, dairy products, eggs, cereals, nuts, especially peanuts, are also good sources of arginine. Regular nut consumption has been shown to be cardioprotective, such as almonds. We will take a short break here at this time for an important message. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Thank you. Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Duplantis with my daily health tip of the day. We're talking about bee pollen today. Bee pollen is in the food of young bees and is approximately 40% protein. It's considered one of nature's most completely nourishing foods. It contains nearly all nutrients required for humans. About half of its protein is in the form of free amino acids that are ready to be used directly by the body. For more information on improving your health, watch my weekly show, It's Your Health, here on Cox Channel 16, every Monday and Friday night at 8 p.m.
NAMI Walks Acadiana, Walk for Mental Health. Save the date, October 1st, 2016. It's at River Ranch Town Square. Call NAMI Walks at 288-0744 or NAMI Walks at NAMIAcadiana.org.
Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Duplantis with Health Tip of the Day on garlic. Garlic possesses an antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal properties, allowing it to stand against all infections. Skin conditions caused by bacteria, virus, and fungi or yeast can be treated with rubbing raw chopped garlic on the affected area. Who would have known? Adding more garlic will improve your health, and the benefits of garlic and the role of prevention of cancer is one of the most notorious. Scientists believe that exceptional anti-cancer properties may have to do with the way that garlic boosts the production of something known as hydrogen sulfide. It is the hydrogen sulfide production that researchers believe to be why garlic is so effective in preventing a wide variety of cancers, including the prostate, breast, and colon cancer. For more prevention in your health and information on how to improve your health and add life to your years, watch my weekly show here on Cox Channel 16 called It's Your Health. It's shown every Monday and Friday nights at 8 p.m. Okay, we're back now. If you're joining us in progress, you're watching my show called It's Your Health. I'm Dr. Richard Duplantis. Our topic today is on inflammation, and we'll join this program in progress. We're talking about the micronutrients now. Several micronutrients are related to diseases that have inflammatory components. Example, as I mentioned, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes is an inflammatory process, inflammatory bowel disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, and rheumatoid arthritis. Some observational studies have reported dietary intake of blood levels of individual micronutrients to be inversely associated with certain biomarkers of inflammation, especially the C-reactive protein biomarker. Magnesium, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, between 1999 and 2000, the U.S. National Survey found American adults who consume less than the RDA of magnesium were 1.4 to 1.75 times more likely to have elevated C-reactive protein levels compared to those who consume at least an RDA. The survey found that 68% of the sample consumed less than the RDA of magnesium. Look at the micronutrient vitamin B6. Body status of certain vitamins may also affect inflammatory process. The analysis of data from a cohort study of 891 elderly adults participating in the Framingham Heart Study indicated that low vitamin B6 status was associated with a higher C-reactive protein levels. This association was independent of plasma homocysteine. In this study, vitamin B6 status was assessed by measuring the plasma levels of pyridoxal 5-phosphate. Pyridoxal 5-phosphate is the active form of the vitamin and considered to be a good indication of long-term body stores. More recently, the plasma PLP levels were inversely associated with the C-reactive protein levels in a cohort older Puerto Rican adults. Low circulating level of vitamin B6 is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease and may also be related to rheumatoid arthritis. However, a double-blind study, placebo-controlled trial in 33 patients with rheumatoid arthritis reported that supplementation with 30 milligrams a day pyridoxine for 30 days corrected the vitamin B6 deficiency but did not improve specific markers of inflammation, including the levels of certain pro-inflammatory cytokines, the erythrocyte sedimentation rate, and the C-reactive protein levels. Moreover, one analysis of data, was indicated that the dietary intakes at levels corresponding to the current RDA may not result in vitamin B6 adequacy, at least in certain subgroups, such as the cigarette smokers, the blacks, and in the elderly. Talking about vitamin C, adequate dietary intake of antioxidant vitamin C is also very important because free radicals have pro-inflammatory effects. And vitamin C, a rich antioxidant, compared to its antioxidant actions, considerably less is known about whether vitamin C has anti-inflammatory effects. A cross-sectional study of 3,258 men ages 60 to 79 years age participated in the British Regional Heart Study and found that both dietary intake and plasma levels of C vitamin C were inversely related to C-reactive protein levels. Higher vitamin C levels were also associated with lower CRP levels, which conclude the data from 14,000 U.S. adults. The randomized controlled trial in healthy non-smokers found that vitamin C supplementation, about 1,000 milligrams per day, for 2 months resulted in a 16% decrease in the median level of C-reactive protein in those with elevated CRP levels, associated with heightened risk of cardiovascular disease. The higher the CRP level is, and this is an interesting study. This trial found that no effect of vitamin C supplementation in those with baseline levels of CRP lower than 1.0. Several epidemiological studies have examined whether dietary intake, supplementation intake, or serum levels of vitamin C are associated with various cardiovascular disease and gout. The results of many of these studies have indicated that vitamin C may help protect against coronary heart disease and gout, diseases with inflammatory components, as we've mentioned above. Additionally, low plasma and leukocyte concentrations of vitamin C have been observed in patients with sepsis, a clinical syndrome characterized by whole body inflammation that can lead to organ failure. We call it SARS in medicine. Come to the micronutrient vitamin D. You have several human studies associated with vitamin D deficiency, impaired vitamin D status with various inflammatory diseases such as Crohn's, other inflammatory bowel diseases. Vitamin D status may also be linked to cardiovascular disease. In certain cancers, a role for vitamin D in inflammation is supported by studies in laboratory animals, particularly mice lacking the vitamin D receptor or the vitamin D activating enzyme 25-hydroxyvitamin D or D3-1 hydroxylase have increased the susceptibility to inflammation, increasing the inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract. We come to the micronutrient of vitamin E. Vitamin E has its effect on inflammation. People are taking vitamin E for a long time to prevent heart disease. Very, very popular. Vitamin E has its effects on the inflammatory process. It's due to the antioxidant function of the alpha tocopherol of vitamin E. Alpha tocopherol exerts an anti-inflammatory effect through a number of different mechanisms, for example, by decreasing the levels of C-reactive protein and pro-inflammatory cytokines by inhibiting the activity of protein kinase C, which is an important cell signaling molecule, and in other enzymes such as cyclooxygenase 2. For information on the role of alpha tocopherol, you can do a Google search for it. There's a lot of information on this compound in regard to cardiovascular disease. A lot of research early on vitamin E was done by the Shute brothers at the Shute Institute. Results of some of the animal studies suggest that vitamin E may also have utility in the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis, but more research in humans is needed to further elucidate this fact. In addition, some cell cultures and animal studies indicate that the gamma tocopherols have anti-inflammatory activities. We turn to now maybe multivitamins. The analysis of randomized double-blind placebo studies in a trial of 87 healthy men and then postmenopausal women who were recruited from the general U.S. population found that supplementation with a daily multivitamin mineral for 6 months was associated with a 14% decrease in C-reactive protein levels. A greater magnitude of the reduction was seen in those with higher baseline levels of C-reactive protein. Did you know? Taking a multivitamin could improve your health, could minimize your chance of developing cardiovascular disease. I think this is something that's important to know. Please do include, taking a multivitamin. So sometimes when our foods are cooked, we don't get all the nutrients we need out of the foods, because also depending on how long you cook the food, you can destroy many of the nutrients sometimes. So a multiple vitamin is a very good idea to take. And we see here a 14% reduction in C-reactive protein. That's pretty remarkable. Okay, its daily use, may help improve nutritional status of several micronutrients when you're taking a multivitamin. It may be a benefit to Americans because according to the U.S. National Survey, over 90% of the population does not meet, the standards of vitamin E intake. Vitamin A is 31% for vitamin C and 14% for vitamin B6, percentage of the standard doses that should be taken. Talking about the phytochemicals, the carotenoids, you have various dietary phytochemicals could affect inflammation in this inflammatory process within the body. The carotenoids, the yellow, orange, and the red pigments synthesized by the plants have a number of different biological activities. In one study, the carotenoid beta-carotene, which a lot of us are familiar with, found in carrots, displayed an anti-inflammatory activity by inhibiting pro-inflammatory gene expression through suppressing the activation of, tumor factor alpha and also the redox-sensitive transcription factor specifically. A disease expression of various pro-inflammatory genes was seen with beta-carotene treatment when the endotoxin was used to induce inflammation in macrophages in vitro as well as in mice in vivo. The carotenoids such as lycopene and astaxanthin have also been shown to exhibit an anti-inflammatory activity in cell cultures in animal models. Sources of lycopene, are tomatoes, red grapefruit, red watermelon, guava, while the main dietary source of astaxanthin includes salmon, shrimp, and other foods. Astaxanthin is what gives salmon its color. Wild salmon has a rich source of astaxanthin, and this astaxanthin is a very, very powerful beta-carotenoid. It's a derivative of a marine algae, which is a very potent antioxidant. Additionally, the putative anti-inflammatory effect of various carotenoids has been examined in humans. Some epidemiological studies have observed serum levels of certain carotenoids, including the alpha-carotene, the beta-carotene, and the beta-cryptoxanthin, lycopene, lutein, and zeaxanthin, to be inversely associated with the circulating levels of C-reactive protein, a cardiovascular and general marker for inflammation in a 4-week randomized controlled trial of healthy non-smoking men. 8 daily servings of carotenoid-rich vegetables and fruit were associated with a reduction in C-reactive protein. Very important for us to eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, and kind of center our diet on a more plant-based diet and kind of move toward that type of a diet. It will lower these pro-inflammatory cytokines, these the pro-inflammatory biomarkers will come down, such as C-reactive protein. Consumption of fruits and vegetables in general, it's been associated with this drop in this biological marker, C-reactive protein, has been dropped, and this is a marker of inflammation. In 2 small intervention trials, the consumption of tomato juice or a tomato-based soft drink was associated with decreased markers of inflammation, but other dietary components of tomatoes besides lycopene, such as vitamin C, may in part be responsible for any beneficial effects on inflammation. Larger clinical trials are needed, of course, to determine whether lycopene or other carotenoids help to reduce inflammation and the risk associated with diseases. But it sure sheds light and gives us a lot of hope in taking an active role in the prevention of these diseases. I want to take another look, in considering the micronutrient. I want to look at the class of flavonoids. This class of phytochemicals, they have anti-inflammatory effects. They include the flavonoids. It's a large family of polyphenolic compounds. It consists of several subclasses, the flavonoids, flavonols, and the flavanones. All of these, the anthocyanins as well as in this group. this is important information, something that, we should keep in mind. You had several studies, and a few in animal studies have shown that various flavonoids, like quercetin, can pose a very powerful anti-inflammatory property. However, limited study on the effect of the flavonoid intake on inflammation process are currently available in humans. In general, the bioavailability of flavonoids is relatively low due to poor absorption and rapid elimination. Once absorbed, flavonoids are rapidly metabolized to form various metabolites. Therefore, in vitro studies that use high concentrations in parent compounds rather than the metabolites may not be physiologically relevant, at all. Additionally, results of study employing animal molecules may not be directly applicable to humans as such. Analysis of data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey in 2002, a cross-section study of U.S. adults, indicated that the total flavonoid intake was inversely related to serum concentration levels of C-reactive protein. Similar inverse associations were found for flavanol, the anthocyanins, and isoflavone intakes, as well as intake of select individual flavonoids, including quercetin. All of these associations were independent of fruit and vegetable consumption. However, a prospective study in a cohort study of 38,000 women participating in the Women's Health Study, followed for almost 9 years, did not observe flavonoid intake to be related to plasma concentrations of C-reactive protein or risk development for type 2 diabetes mellitus. This study found consumption of flavonoid-rich apples was associated with a significantly reduced risk for type 2 diabetes. Such an effect might not necessarily be attributed to flavonoids. Tea also contains high levels of the flavonoids, and regular consumption of tea may help prevent chronic diseases associated with inflammation, such as cardiovascular disease and cancer. I like to drink a lot of green tea, and it's got a lot of very powerful antioxidants. Green tea actually tastes very good. Try to inject into your diet some of this knowledge and apply it, make it applicable to your life, and you'll be healthier as a result. We looked at other dietary phytochemicals, a 6-week placebo-controlled trial of 20 healthy adults associated with the consumption of an extract of Polygonum cuspiditium that contained 20% resveratrol, with decreased plasma levels of tumor necrosis factor alpha and of pro-inflammatory cytokines and reduction in the nuclear bonding, of the pro-inflammatory transcription factors. Other phytochemicals, namely curcumin and gallate-derived compounds, have been shown to exhibit anti-inflammatory properties, many in cell cultures or animal studies as well. Additionally, a high dose of the spice ginger has been shown to have anti-inflammatory effects in the rats. Large-scale randomized controlled trials are needed to determine the effects of these phytochemicals on inflammatory processes of human disease. You have other compounds. The alpha-lipoic acid is a natural occurring compound that is synthesized in small amounts by the body. It's also obtained in the diet from tomatoes, green leafy vegetables, cruciferous vegetables, and other sources. Endogenous alpha-lipoic acid functions as a cofactor for microbial enzymes and important in the generation of energy. When provided as a dietary supplement, however, alpha-lipoic acid may display a number of other biological activities, including antioxidant and anti-inflammatory functions, resulting from studies in cell cultures and animal models have shown that these compounds have anti-inflammatory properties. But human data are extremely limited. Small placebo-controlled trial in patients with metabolic syndrome found that supplementation with alpha-lipoic acid, 300 milligrams for 4 weeks, resulted in a 15% decline in plasma levels of interleukin-6, which is an inflammatory marker for atherosclerosis. Lifestyle factors play a big role in inflammation. Animal and human studies have found that various forms of physical activity decrease both the acute and chronic inflammation as measured by reductions in the C-reactive protein level and certain pro-inflammatory cytokines. Moreover, regular physical activity is important in reducing one's risk for obesity and chronic diseases associated with inflammation. However, excessive exercise can increase systemic inflammation. For example, overtraining syndrome in athletes is associated with systemic inflammation and suppressed immune function. Several studies have shown that moderate alcohol consumption decreases the risk of cardiovascular disease as well as in mortality. But I really wouldn't go out and buy a case of wine to improve your health. Further smoking cessation has been reported to decrease C-reactive protein and other biomarkers of inflammation. We've given out a lot of information today on the inflammatory process, and I tie in the diet and also the lifestyle and lowering the C-reactive protein levels. This biomarker for inflammation in the body. This biomarker for inflammation, and inflammation is pointed towards so many diseases of a chronic nature. We're talking about type 2 diabetes. We're talking about atherosclerosis. And there's even a link to Alzheimer's, that inflammation plays a role in Alzheimer's, definitely plays a role in cancer as well. So inflammation, it can be serious. So there are things we can do to lower this inflammation in the body. Moderate exercise, but not overtraining, will lower the C-reactive protein level and will lower inflammation in the body. I want to thank you for tuning into my show today, and I hope you will continue to tune in the future. I'm Dr. Rick Duplantis. Have a pleasant good evening. God bless you.